can't is not a word that I use or I see. I don't care if you can't, don't put your limits on me.
Excuses are tools of the incompetent, used to build bridges to nowhere and monuments of nothingness.
I used to have this funny list called Reasons for Not Looking Good. I used to blame the government. I mean, you can believe that or not. It was at the top of my list. I had a lecture second to none. The government. That was on my list. I used to blame taxes. Look what you got left after they take everything. And they expect you to do well. That was on my list there. Prices, that one's easy, right? You walk into the supermarket with $20, come out with a little half bag. So I had that on my list. I used to blame the weather. I blamed the traffic. I used to blame my car. I blamed the manufacturers. I used to blame the company. I blamed company policy. I used to blame the training program. I blame my negative relatives. They were always putting me down. I blame my cynical neighbors. They're just selfish, looking out for themselves. Won't loan you money? They were on my list. I used to blame the economy. I blamed the community. That's a pretty good list for not doing well, isn't it? I thought it was good. I'll never forget one day, Mr. Schoaf was very kind, but he was also very blunt. And this was no exception. And I'm glad he was blunt. There's a lot of things I'd have missed if he hadn't have been blunt. One day, with sort of a curious look on his face, he said, "Jim, just out of curiosity, tell me, how come you haven't done well up until now?" Excellent question. I thought, well, so I won't look too bad, I'll go through my list. And this list I just gave you, I put that on him. And he was very patient. He let me go through the whole thing, the government, the weather. I went through this whole thing. When I finished, he looked my list over very carefully. He said, "Mr. Rohn, big problem with your list. You ain't on it." How brilliant. But see, those are the happenings, right? Everything can happen. Anything can happen. But it's not the happenings. It's what you do about it. Somebody says, "Yeah, but you don't understand the disappointments I've had." Come on. Everybody's had their share. Disappointments are not special gifts reserved for the poor. Everybody has them. The difference is what you do about them. It's not the weather. I used to blame the weather, and I discovered it rains on the rich. So see, that won't help. Two men wake up one morning, there's a rainstorm on. One of them looks out his window, sees the rainstorm, and he says, "Wow, what a storm. With weather like this, they can't expect you to go out and make sales." He stays home. Same morning, the other guy looks out his window, sees the same storm, says, "Wow, what a storm." But he says, "You know what, with weather like this, what a great day to go out and make sales. Most everybody will probably be home, especially the salesman."
I'm very against complaining. I'm very put your head down. I'm very, don't you realize you're healthy? Like, to me, the only thing you should complain about is the unfortunate unluck of health. You know, somebody dying that you love in a car accident, or you becoming terminally ill. After that, it feels controllable. And so I really dislike complaining. I talk a lot about honey over vinegar. It's an analogy I use a lot here at VaynerMedia. I thrive on positivity, and so the way I deal with complaining is I try not to do it. I try to educate and empower people the lack of its value, I guess. I mean, I don't have a gear. There, you know, when you go on my gear, like, there is no like, oh, let me go into complain zone. To me, it's assess, figure it out, and go directly back on the offense. I'm a very offensive player. Complaining is the defense.
I don't care nothing about a recession. I don't care about what's going on around you. It's what goes on in you that counts. It's what you think about you and not what others think. And so I need you to pull it together. Listen to me closely. The first thing I need you to do for me, because you can do this, all right? You can do it. It's not about, hear me out. It's not about making excuses. It's about making adjustments. Hear what I'm telling you. It's not about excuses. We all have them. We all got some good reasons for why we're not doing what we're supposed to do. But listen to me. Don't make excuses. Make adjustments.
How many of you know people who moan and groan and complain about life all the time, all right? They might moan and groan about their job. I'm sick of this job. I'm sick of you. And they just moan and groan and complain all the time and never do anything about it. They haven't got to the point where they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. They just have enough energy to complain about it, and they consider that, in fact, they believe that that's equivalent to doing something about it, just complaining. No, that can't get you where you want to go. That cannot create your reality for you.
If you don't think it's bad, ask the children of Israel of Old Testament fame. Typical of us all, their story just happened to get in the book. Story says, children of Israel were slaves. God performed a series of dazzling miracles and got them out. And now they're heading for the promised land. Remember the story? Heading for the promised land. Tragedy of the story, they never got there. Reason. From day one, they started to complain. They griped about the water. They griped about the weather. They whined and cried and griped about the food. They griped about the leadership. They whined and cried because it was too far, too cold, too hot, too difficult, too miserable. I mean, they whined and cried for years. Finally, God said, "I've had it, trip canceled." Or something like that. The story says they died in the desert, never got to the promised land. Which I think means two things. Indulge in this long enough, you get your future canceled. And I guess it also means even God himself can only take so much. Just be on the lookout of the things that can destroy all the good you start. The war is on. And this evening, tomorrow, mentally, personally, socially, economically, you got to make sure you're winning the war. And this is part of it.
And so it's not about making excuses. Well, we weren't prepared for this, and we're a small company. We weren't thinking about this. No, let's make the adjustments. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's not about that. It's about there's some things that we're doing right now that are good, but they're not great. So what do we do as a company to make the adjustments? Don't talk about it. We just got to write the stuff down and do it. So look, stop making excuses and make the adjustment, because you can have what you want, do what you want, be what you want, but you cannot do it if you're coming up with all these reasons why. The window of opportunity is small. It's small, all right? But there's an opportunity.
I had a tendency sometimes to make excuses for me not doing the right thing. But one of the things that all of you have learned over the last 4 years is there's no longer any room for excuses. It's just that in today's hyper-connected, hyper-competitive world with millions of young people from China and India and Brazil, many of whom started with a whole lot less than all of you did, all of them entering the global workforce alongside you, nobody is going to give you anything that you have not earned. Nobody cares how tough your upbringing was. Excuses are tools of the incompetent, used to build bridges to nowhere and monuments of nothingness.